Rob Moran is an osteopath and senior lecturer in the Faculty of Social and Health Sciences at Unitec in Auckland, where he teaches in the undergraduate and master's program of osteopathy. And in his spare time, he is undertaking a PhD at Otago. He'll be talking about lessons learned from the introduction of ancestral principles into the osteopathy program. So please welcome Rob Moran.
Kia ora. So I'm from Auckland. Sorry about that. This is the local beach. It's Waitemata Harbour, and I grew up under the shadow of Rangitoto. And this picture encapsulates for me what it is for me to live in Auckland, which is not everybody's experience. So this is the image of a middle-aged man running spontaneously down the beach on a Sunday morning in the middle of winter, chasing a pod of orca who are chasing stingrays, and kind of whipping with his children that it's good to be alive. And it kind of encapsulates that whole idea of ancestral health. So this may be a little bit how you're feeling, and it will be even worse tomorrow. I've certainly been accused of presenting with this kind of picture going on in the back of my head. So if I get too fast or a bit rabid, slow me down. So what I'm going to try and get through, and I'm going to push quite hard to get through this, is to talk about our experience in teaching ancestral health principles in our undergrad program. So osteopathy is a regulated health profession in New Zealand. It has a major interest in disorders of the musculoskeletal system and associated disorders. And our primary kind of therapeutic approach is to use manual and manipulative therapies. Generally, osteopaths take a pretty broad view of health and illness, and we use a biopsychosocial approach, both in thinking about illness and also therapeutically. So a statistician would describe that as being a multivariate problem. For any statistician geeks here, probably nobody. So what that means is there are lots of factors involved in disease causation or illness causation, and we need to be thinking about, I think I will not cross this barrier and stay away from that mic. We need to be thinking about all the different factors that might be involved and how they interact, and that's kind of the approach we take. So osteopathy emerged in the 1870s, it's a very long time ago. I dug out this image because the tools that emerged in osteopathy were very much manual therapy and hands-on, but they emerged at a time when this kind of picture was completely common. This happens to be Oklahoma. It's about the place in the world, Midwestern United States, where osteopathy kind of popped out. This is Barry the brickmaker. He has a pretty tough life. He probably died of communicable disease or trauma in a gunfight or something nasty that largely we don't die of now in the developed world. Being unable to work was a major threat to Barry, the brickmaker, and if he had aches and pains through exposure to a large volume of difficult musculoskeletal load, then the ministrations of a kind of a push and pull around on his bones and joints and sore back may have meant that he was able to get back to work. This is Ernie the electron pusher. It's a completely different problem. So while the problem over with Barry was one of too much exposure, and the appropriate response to load, the appropriate response was to give him some passive therapy, for him to be a passive recipient of care. That's no longer the case in terms of applying passive therapies to the problems that face us now. So the bonus with Ernie when he turns up with his back pain is that he comes with bonus chronic conditions. He kind of gets this automatic, would you like one of those? Yes, back pain, can you have a few of these? Yes, why don't you have metabolic syndrome or hypertension or something else thrown in on the side? And this creates quite a bit of problem for us in terms of thinking about prognosis and the right approach, because a looming health crisis is not necessarily this guy's low back pain, it's actually his health status. So our approach to, this slide is intended to indicate that we've talked a lot about non-communicable disease and chronic disease. What we haven't really talked about or touched on very much at all is the musculoskeletal burden associated with that. And that's been a major focus of the bone and joint decade, which was between 2000 and 2010. And these are the top 4 conditions that come out. You notice, I'll keep moving through this. I think we've been bashed over the head enough with shock and awe statistics around NCDs, and so I'll move past these quite properly. This one just catches my eye because not only are these problematic in terms of morbidity, they're actually interfering with our response to other developmental problems, the development in geopolitics and, the reduction of health inequities, economic stability, and even human security. So they're big problems. So how do we respond in osteopathy to Ernie and as a health professional generally? Our response to Ernie, he comes in with low back pain or some other musculoskeletal problem, or his neck pain or his overuse injury, but he turns up with these other things. And we need to find a way, or to start thinking about the future of provision of musculoskeletal care. And we need to think about how we might do that and how we might organise it. And so what we came across was this Ancestral Health framework, and we love it because it's a bit of a catch-all. In our program, it's a 3 years, 2 years degree. It's a bachelor's program and a master's. And we happened to have an opportunity 2 years ago to do a reorganisation of the degree because of some the way the institution was changing things around. And so we kind of grabbed that opportunity to put in these 2 courses to get some of these ideas in very early. So we had one course in year 1 called the Modifiable Determinants of Health, and another one called Movement and Health in year 2, which kind of takes the movement piece and blows it up into a whole course. So the advantages of the Ancestral Health framework that we have considered when we were looking at this problem was that, first of all, evobiology is just a fantastic framework and fantastic lens through which to view the world and to view these problems. This is Dr. Zansky. Excuse me just a minute. So lots of you will be familiar with the quote from Dr. Zansky saying, nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. And it's a fantastic quote that I think it encapsulates how powerful it is. The second real advantage that we see here is that there's a framework here. There's a place to hang stuff. You can learn something and hang it on this kind of framework in your head, and then you can relate it to other bits of learning. And when you make connections between those learnings, that drives this depth of learning. And you also get to learn principles, and principles are really powerful when we come to solve problems because you have a way to tackle problems, not just because you've got content, but because you have a process by which to do that. The other 2 angles that we really like are that the Ancestral Health framework is super interdisciplinary, and I think we've seen that compellingly here. We've seen any number of professions and vocations and academic disciplines, and it's a real mixing pot, and it enables us to think about problems on lots of different ways. We get to think very broadly and very deeply. We can move from cell signalling right up the way through to population health, and so we kind of have the best of, we have a massive fabric, both deep and wide, through which to navigate. But strengths and limitations, strengths can also be limitations, and you can see here the breadth even on this program is massive. And so what are you going to teach in 3 or 4 hours a week for 12 weeks of the year? What do you pick? So sort of drivers for us were, we wanted to pick on things that there was quite robust evidence for. We wanted to have an angle on all our topics that were very practical, because we consider that experience is just unsurpassed in terms of its learning. So if we could get people actively involved in the material, and then we wanted to have topics that related to people personally, to small groups, out through societies, populations, and globally. So broadly, there's non-modifiable and modifiable kind of determinants of health, and we were pretty focused on entertaining modifiable determinants, because those are the dials that we get to turn, but also with an acknowledgement that these dials turn in the context of our genetics. And so we acknowledge the role of genetics, but it's not a focus of the course. So we're not teaching genetics. We touch on epigenetics, but mostly we're talking about directly modifiable events. So those that we ended up with were, eat, sleep, move, and socialisation, or different versions of social. And one of the reasons we like these very much, not only because they kind of fit squarely within ancestral health, but also we are all obligated to do these. This is just about being human. So in lots of ways we're teaching the course in being a human, being a better version of a human. The other angle here is that these look like they might explain quite a bit of the modifiable components. These explain, these 4 factors, quite a bit of outcome. And so we kind of applied this, well, which of the factors can we select and which of those dials can we turn for most benefit? So we teach these topics and a couple of concepts, and then we wrap that around with practical behaviour change. I just mentioned here we did make a mistake initially in the way we taught behaviour change. We taught it from a very theoretical perspective, which was, in retrospect, a really silly thing to do, quite obviously. And we've subsequently replaced that with basically, it's a tips and tricks about how to get stuff done. So we've really changed the way we teach behaviour. So the first concept we teach is the mismatch hypothesis. There's no virtual chocolate fish for anyone who, there's not a virtual chocolate fish for anyone who hasn't seen this 3 or 4 times already through the weekend. And we try and emphasise this kind of this mismatch between our recent, the abundance that characterises our current environment and the scarcity that our genes evolved in. The gap between these is pretty much, we can pictorially represent as the mismatch hypothesis, and we draw on the work of Dan Lieberman to describe this. In fact, how many people have seen this book or read it? If you haven't read this book, this is probably I think the single best resource at the moment to help frame some of these topics and some of these arguments that are going on. So one of the ways we indicate this mismatch hypothesis, one of the key things you need to get hold of as an idea is that the evolutionary timescale is vast. And one of the ways we indicate that is we pace out, well I pace out, because it's on the idiot who teaches this, so we pace out 10 metres, which comes down here somewhere, roughly. And then we say, hey, the period over which that's the period over which our genes evolved. This 2.4 million years. Modern hominids have been somewhere around there. Hey, and we ask the question, which I'm going to ask you now, which is kind of this horror quiz question about, a train arrives at a station and, no, my wife didn't say that would be a very good joke either. We look at the carpet tile, and we have a look at the carpet tile and we say, hey, how long ago in that span do you think we domesticated animals moved to an agricultural society or an agrarian society? Anyone like to posit a guess? It's yeah, you've seen the movie. It's tiny. It's about 41 millimetres. It's this tiny little half a carpet tile. Let alone the time that we've been using furniture, in an office environment, or just living the way we currently live. That doesn't even get onto the, we'd have to pull out, some nanotechnology to kind of have a look at that. So the second concept we teach is health as a process, and you've heard this already quite a bit too. We want to focus on the inputs. We want to let the outcomes take care of themselves. So if we're really just too much focus on the outcomes, and when we do focus on the outcomes, it's often too late to do anything about it anyway. So we have a real need to do the right things the right way, and this relates a little bit to the way that Ihi was talking yesterday. There's a nice connection between those two. That if you do the right things, that health comes out as something that just happens along the way. You don't have to focus on health very hard. I'll move along a little bit. You've already we talk about 6 provocations. So this is the way we kind of tackle this at the start. This is the kind of big opener. I'll walk through these really quickly. And the reason we use stories to illustrate these provocations, these ways to get people thinking. And the reason we use stories is because they're a really compelling way to communicate, and we're highly adapted actually to hearing and interpreting and taking on board stories and storytelling. So there's actually evidence for the use of narrative and storytelling in communicating medicine. So the first one we'll use is the zoo gorilla story. How many people have seen this? Yep, so you're well familiar with it. So basically the story goes that if you feed gorillas dog biscuits, they get sick and they get heart disease, and if you feed them natural food, they don't. This second provocation is around sugar. Sugar's, of course, got a massive media interest at the moment. It's a very hot topic, and so there's always discussion. In the last 2 years we've taught this course, been a real interest in the nature of sugar and its perils. And when it's the question inevitably arises, how much sugar are we allowed to have? We show this video. This is the only really response. We say, look, here's Tete. He's 40 metres up in the canopy, and if you get the chance to watch this, how many people have seen this? Okay, if you haven't seen this, this is quite remarkable. Tete, the indigenous Congolese living in the Congo, climbs 40 metres unclipped to any safety restraint to be attacked by a million bees flying around his head, to pull out honeycomb and honey 40 metres in the air. And if he falls, he will die. And his family down the bottom going. Anyway, you can see the video. But the answer to the question how much sugar you can have, as much as you like, as long as you earn it. And this is earning. The third provocation is about sleep and light. We emphasise the role of light exposure, and we kind of do this experiment where we say, hey, when was the best time you've ever had a sleep? We have a little kind of a chat about this. And often people's memory of sleeping the best comes from sleeping in a camping environment, like in a really basic camping environment. This happens to be a photo of my family camping on Mohi Island in the Gulf. And we talk about and point out the role of different colour temperature and its role in signalling. And then if you haven't been camping, or you just want to do this with your family, because they won't go to bed early enough, like your little kids, like mine, we do this urban camping game, where we say, there's no power, there's been a power cut. And you do that 3 nights in a row, and everyone's circadian rhythm, mint. We point out the use of flux. You might have seen it yesterday, around this time yesterday. Yep. So lots of people understand what flux is. Hands up who have, yep, excellent. So you know how important that is. And the provocation we use is movement and mortality. So we have people do the silk to rise test, which is a lot like erect exercise, but just with a bit of numbers around it. It's a really simple response to a really simple metric for mortality that doesn't fall victim to scientism. How many people have seen sit to rise? Okay, right. I won't, I'll just move through these. Basically, there's a very strong relationship between the ability to stand with minimum use of supports and props and life expectancy or mortality. This photo doesn't show very well, but this is, we get out in the corridor and get our shoes off, and this creates all kinds of drama when the dean walks past, which they did just before this photo was taken. It doesn't create drama, it just creates like kind of an eyeball look, and that's fine. I happen to have just, at this point, recovered from a fractured ankle, which happened in July, which was quite a gnarly looking fracture. Gnarlier on bruising than it was on the, but it was a really nice way to demonstrate actually that what I used in rehabilitating the ankle was basically erect exercise, stand up, get down, and all the archetypal postures that Phil's been running in lunchtimes, and rehabilitated that ankle very successfully using that approach. The fifth provocation is around the importance of play, which you've heard Darryl Edwards talk about a lot. This, of course, is George Bernard Shaw, who we don't stop playing because we grow old because we stop playing. And I'm rushing, but it's actually a very deep thought, and it's one I've used several times when I've been playing at the jungle gym with my kids at the school, and parents are sitting on the side on a Saturday afternoon, and they kind of look at me, and you can just hear them going, "You're a nutter." And one woman actually said to me, "You okay?" I said this back to her, which I'm probably not something to be proud of actually. So I show personal photos in these provocations, and the discussions are personal, and they're personal for a reason. They're a little bit risky to use personal photographs, but the benefit is they're incredibly authentic, and there's a credibility that comes along with that. And I think if you're trying to kind of provoke action in 18-year-olds who would rather be, frankly, a Monday morning not in your lecture theatre and not in your tutorial room, then that's a way to do that. You'll see that this is engaging. Like my eyes, I caught this off a video, extracted that from. Like there's no doubt that there was nothing else in my mind right here except for whatever it was that was going to hit me in the face, which was a little stick you can see here. Yeah. So this is the playground where I've said rude things to people. The next provocation is social interaction, and of course our starting point for this is Dunbar's number. How many people are familiar with Dunbar's number? Okay, brilliant. If you're not familiar, it's worth a read around. But it basically says the neocortex appears to be adapted for social groups with a mean number of somewhere between 1 and 200, and people kind of throw around this number of 150 just for convenience. But we explore this idea, and then we ask this question. And there's kind of some, yeah. And if you actually go around the room a little bit, it's 300, 400, it's okay to have 500 Facebook friends, apparently. But are these stable relationships that are meaningful? And we have kind of that exploration, and we don't have to say very much. You just have to kind of go like this, and then like that. Obviously with 15 minutes of talking and discussion in between. And there's kind of this fill in the gap moment. And then you smash them with the evidence as well, if you really feel powerful. Someone says, oh, I've heard there's no evidence. Yeah, there is. So there's actually this study, which shows that the more people use Facebook, so these are 84 20-year-olds, university students in the United States. So the more people use Facebook at one time point, the worse they felt the next time we text message them. And the more they use Facebook over 2 weeks, the more their life satisfaction levels decline over time. And so I think it's slightly ironic that they're messaging them using this kind of sort of semi-social media form of communication, but nevertheless very effective and quite a compelling story. I'll skip over this one. I haven't heard this yet this weekend. It's actually quite tough to speak at the end of the day on the second day when you've heard a lot of stuff and you're trying to get the new angles. No one's talked about this yet, the importance of social relationships. So this is a really large meta-analysis that indicates over 300,000 people, the magnitude of the effect for adequate social relationships, not even good social relationships, just adequate, is comparable with quitting smoking. It's pretty compelling. So in terms of engaging students, we know that assessment drives their learning. We just can't help it. That's just the way that is. And so what we do is have them do a self-experiment. You will have heard this idea from Michelle Dickinson early. So the idea that your body is an experimental laboratory, and we just do this for grown-ups, or olders. So they do this own experiment. They have to plan it. They have to identify which determinants they're going to manipulate, what the outcomes are, what measures they'll use, how they'll go about it. And we end up with some very interesting kind of projects that emerge out of this. I'll just talk about one. Whoop, no, this one. Slightly ahead of myself. So rejecting furniture, what are the effects of energy levels, flexibility, digestion, and posture? So the student removes furniture, lives on the floor pretty much, comes to class, sits down on the ground, squats, kind of actually gets a squat toilet going. Bit of a kind of a bush version of the squat toilet, pretty interesting. Compares pre and post mobility measures in terms of her ability to sit and squat and for duration. And also has a look at the Bristol Stool Scale. How many people are familiar with the Bristol Stool Scale? Oh, brilliant, that actually. Very good. Here's another one. We asked them to really illustrate their kind of interventions for proof, so that, not actually so that they can't just make it up the night before, but actually so that they go through the process of journaling and reflecting, and actually documenting. And the documentation becomes like a preliminary sort of approach to measurement. Sorry about that, it's kind of scientism. But here's an example. So this particular student really found it difficult to sit on the floor, had a dodgy hip. She's 27 years old. She said, this is ridiculous. I'm going to use archetypal postures, get rid of all my kind of furniture. I'm going to do a little bit of foam rolling, do my yoga class once a week, which has been going nowhere. And we kind of see quite an improvement in her ability to cross the legs over 30 days. This is the Taylor's position. So that one improved, got much more balanced. And then sitting back on her feet, she gets a much nicer posture. 5-foot challenges. This stuff can look weird. This is a real dilemma. How weird do you want to look? Like when you're teaching this stuff, or the content, what kind of spin do you put on it? The practice of it looks, it just can look odd to people not versed in what it's all about. And so the tension between looking too weird and not being weird enough. It's like, is it okay to wear shoes? I don't know. Like, is it okay to wear bare feet in class? I don't know. Like, it's tricky. The second one is there's a real tendency in tertiary education to move from the bottom up, so from kind of mechanisms, physiology, basic science, applied science, kind of getting eventually to practitionership and clinicianship when you're teaching practitioners. And here we're trying to teach a user guide. We're trying to say, hey, this is the way you navigate your iPad on the outside. You don't have to know about the workings of the iPad. You don't have to know about the electronics. You can, this is just, you can get around this thing. This is your body. This is your life. You can make this work really well. So these ideas are kind of dangerous as well. And your belief systems might be threatened. Other people's belief systems might change because your belief systems change. And there's a risk in losing the docility that Andrew talked about on the first one. And that can be a frustration because you got to deal with other people who are idiots because you know how those work. So that's a threat. The other thing is understanding is pretty straightforward. Its application in clinic is really difficult. And these are currently what second year students have been through this program. They don't get into clinic till the end of third year. And so it'd be really interesting to see, and we're having to think about how this will work, how they will sort of be able to pull these ideas and how they will be expressed in a clinical context. Because the clinical models that we use now aren't really well structured to deal with these things. And that's probably not just true of us in our 30 to 45 minute appointments. It's also true of GPs and any practitioner who's working on some kind of existing model. So we might have to think about new practice models. The fifth one is criticality, and there's a real tension around criticality. You've got to teach the content and be critical all at the same time. And sometimes that creates a lot of dissonance because it's very difficult to learn stuff and be critical of it, and you kind of go back and forward, and you can kind of get stuck in that little balance dilemma. So we use this idea, it's to hold make sure I get it right, hold strong opinions loosely. So we're prepared to bend around, to change our minds, to reverse thinking as the evidence changes, as the evidence base tells us that we've been kind of assuming something wrongly, that we're prepared to do that. So what does the future look like in education in this space? Well, I have no idea, frankly. But I'd like to think that we could develop some kind of curriculum that might be some kind of crowdsourced or open source curriculum that we might be able to share, not just our little bit of interpretation of this concept, but actually globally there might be a need to, or a way to develop a curriculum that could be shared. And then we need to think about ideas like scale and distribution. Like, what would we do with the curriculum? Would people, one of the mechanisms to distribute these ideas more, off scale is to use something like a massive online open course. How many people have seen MOOCs or used them? Yeah, so they offer some really interesting advantages and some limitations, but they might be a really interesting way to go. So, thanks.